Emily Harper and her parents, David and Laura, never imagined that an ordinary afternoon at the park would spiral into a 7-year nightmare of disappearance, mystery, and unspeakable horror. In the summer of 2014, Emily Harper's world was ordinary and small, shaped by her home, her school, and the quiet streets of her suburban neighborhood. She was 8 years old, with bright eyes that seemed to hold endless curiosity and a laugh that could fill a room. Her days were a routine of school, playgrounds, and afternoons spent riding her bicycle around the block. Her parents, David and Laura Harper, worked regular jobs and tried to keep their family life steady, careful to protect Emily from the worries of the world. But that ordinary life shattered one ordinary afternoon when Emily did not come home. It began like any other day. Emily had gone to the park with her backpack, eager to meet friends she often played with near the small playground at the edge of the neighborhood. Hours passed, and when the sun began to sink below the rooftops, she still hadn't returned. Her parents called her name through the streets, checked every familiar corner, and eventually panic crept in. Phone calls were made, neighbors were alerted, and local authorities were contacted. At first, it seemed possible she had wandered off somewhere familiar or that a friend's parent had taken her in for safety. But as hours stretched into a day, hope began to fade. Police arrived and launched a full investigation, treating the disappearance with the seriousness it demanded. Officers canvassed the area, knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors, and searching public spaces. Security footage from nearby streets was reviewed frame by frame, but nothing emerged. There were no shadows following her, no suspicious vehicles, no trace of where she had gone. The neighborhood, once calm and unremarkable, became a place of suspicion. Parents pulled their children inside, locks clicked more frequently, and the chatter of everyday life was replaced with whispers of fear and uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Emily expanded. Volunteers joined police patrols, posters with her face appeared in every store, and social media amplified pleas for information. Every call was followed, every lead pursued, but the trail grew colder with each passing day. Authorities began to consider the possibility that Emily had been taken by someone outside her circle, someone who had studied her routines and knew when she would be alone. The idea was terrifying, but with no evidence, the case stalled. As the weeks faded into months, the disappearance transformed into a ghost haunting the Harper family. Friends and relatives tried to offer comfort, but nothing could fill the absence of a child who had once been so vivid and alive. The case was eventually labeled cold, moved to a section where it joined countless others unsolved, forgotten by the world but never by those who loved her. The neighborhood attempted to regain normalcy, but the sense of vulnerability lingered. Every missing child poster reminded the community that the ordinary could vanish in an instant, leaving only fear, questions, and the heavy, silent weight of a life abruptly taken. 7 years had passed since Emily Harper vanished, and the world had almost begun to accept her disappearance as one of those unsolved tragedies that left more questions than answers. Her parents, though never giving up hope entirely, had grown accustomed to the ache of absence, to the empty spaces where her laughter once echoed. They moved cautiously through their days, haunted by the memory of a small girl who had vanished in a moment that no one could explain. Then, in the summer of 2021, everything changed in the most shocking and horrifying way imaginable. A park ranger named Daniel Torres was performing a routine patrol along the remote outskirts of a desert that stretched for miles beyond the city limits. The heat pressed down, the sand shifting beneath his boots, the wind carrying the dry, whispering sound of the barren land. His Bodycam recorded every step, every movement, as he traced paths that had been carved by years of neglect and human abandonment. What he noticed first was subtle a patch of sand that looked disturbed, uneven against the natural wind patterns. At first, he thought it might be the work of an animal or another hiker, but the irregularity persisted, forming shapes that suggested something far more sinister. As Torres approached, his flashlight caught a glint of something unnatural beneath the sand. Kneeling, he began to dig carefully, the weight of unease growing with every scoop. Soon, he uncovered human remains, small and fragile, partially buried and twisted by time. His body cam recorded the moment, capturing the realization that would ripple far beyond the desert's empty expanse. Emergency services were immediately called, and forensic teams arrived, working under the glaring sun to uncover the grim truth. When identification was confirmed, disbelief turned into horror. The remains belonged to Emily Harper, the little girl who had vanished so many years ago. The desert that had seemed so peaceful and uninhabited had become a secret grave, a place where unimaginable suffering had unfolded far from prying eyes. The forensic analysis revealed clear signs that Emily had endured years of captivity and abuse. Her tiny body bore the marks of prolonged suffering, and the meticulous care with which she had been hidden suggested a calculated effort to keep her isolated. Every discovery added weight to the nightmare that had been kept from the world for 7 long years. The bodycam footage captured the ranger's careful movements, the surrounding emptiness, and the slow, terrifying realization that this was not a simple disappearance but a story of prolonged cruelty and concealment. The community that had mourned in silence was shaken to its core. The discovery reopened wounds, stirring memories and fears that had been lying dormant for years. People questioned how such a tragedy could remain hidden for so long, how a child could be taken and held without detection, and why the desert, so vast and desolate, had been chosen as the final resting place. Every detail recorded by the bodycam became a window into the horror, revealing a crime that defied understanding and demanded answers. The world that had once accepted Emily's absence now faced the horrifying truth of what had happened in those lost years. And the search for justice began again, this time with the grim clarity of her discovery. The discovery of Emily Harper's body sent shockwaves through law enforcement, who immediately began piecing together the fragments of a story that had been hidden for 7 long years. Forensic teams combed the desert site with meticulous care, using every tool available to uncover the smallest clue. The sand had preserved subtle traces of the past, tiny objects that had been buried alongside her, the faint impressions of footprints leading away from the spot, and fragments of personal belongings that suggested a long, harrowing captivity. Each detail became a thread in a tangled web that investigators had to untangle carefully, reconstructing a timeline of suffering that no one had imagined. Among the first discoveries was a small, worn backpack, partially disintegrated by the harsh desert conditions. Inside were fragments of clothing, a few tattered notebooks, and a collection of trinkets that appeared to belong to Emily. Forensic teams analyzed the notebooks, finding pages filled with crude drawings and faint writing that hinted at her attempts to communicate. To leave behind a trace of her ordeal, the drawings depicted strange, shadowy figures and abstract symbols, possibly representing the torment she endured. These fragments painted a haunting picture of isolation and fear, offering investigators the first real insight into the years of captivity that had been concealed from the world. As the investigation progressed, evidence suggested that Emily had not simply been abandoned in the desert. She had been held in multiple locations over the years. The positioning of her body, the arrangement of the few personal effects, and subtle environmental clues indicated that her captor was familiar with the terrain and had intentionally used the desert's remote landscape to hide her. Small details, like the remnants of a makeshift shelter near the burial site, hinted that the perpetrator had planned every step carefully, ensuring that no one would stumble upon Emily until it was too late. Investigators also discovered messages etched into rocks and partially buried in the sand near the site. At first, the markings seemed indecipherable, but careful analysis revealed patterns that corresponded with simple letters and symbols. Experts concluded that these were likely Emily's own attempts to leave a record of her suffering, a desperate cry for help that had gone unnoticed for years. Each mark told a fragment of her story, brief glimpses of pain, fleeting moments of hope, and the constant presence of fear. These markings became crucial evidence linking the physical location to the psychological and emotional experiences of the young girl. As the forensic team worked tirelessly, the picture of Emily's captivity slowly began to emerge. The desert, once thought to be an empty expanse, revealed itself as a silent witness to unspeakable cruelty. The scattered belongings, the faint writings, and the traces of human activity told a story of a predator who had meticulously controlled every aspect of Emily's life. Each discovery added weight to the investigation, turning what had begun as a tragic recovery into a complex effort to understand how a child could be taken, hidden, and tormented for years. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, became a crucial step toward uncovering the truth and bringing the person responsible to justice. Months of painstaking investigation slowly began to yield results. The forensic evidence collected from the desert site was cross-referenced with missing persons databases, criminal records, and digital activity logs. Analysts scrutinized cell phone pings, online searches, and social media footprints, piecing together connections that had previously gone unnoticed. One man emerged from the web of data, a figure with a long history of predatory behavior and a suspicious presence near the desert over the years. He had lived alone, often traveling but always returning to the area surrounding the remote site where Emily's body had been found. The pattern of his movements, combined with circumstantial evidence, drew the attention of law enforcement as a likely suspect. Authorities dug deeper into his past, uncovering links to several unsolved child disappearances over the previous decade. His criminal record revealed a history of manipulation, abduction, and confinement, but he had somehow evaded the most serious consequences. The desert site, with its hidden corners and isolated terrain, appeared to be his preferred location for hiding evidence. Neighbors recalled fleeting interactions, small glimpses of behavior that now seemed ominously consistent with the profile investigators were building. No single detail alone had been enough to implicate him, but together they formed a disturbing mosaic of deliberate secrecy and careful planning. Investigators also examined his property, following every lead from the digital evidence. In the remote cabin he occupied, they discovered items that connected him directly to Emily. Photos of a young girl, journals detailing day-to-day activities, and digital files chronicling events that could not otherwise be explained provided chilling insight into his mindset. These documents depicted not only the physical confinement of the child, but also the psychological control he exercised. Every note, every photograph, every fragment of his recorded life suggested a methodical, premeditated approach to keeping Emily hidden and isolated for years. Interviews with acquaintances revealed a man whose outward appearance was ordinary, even unremarkable. To those around him, he seemed quiet, reclusive, and mostly harmless. But beneath that facade was a calculated predator, one who had studied the terrain, understood human behavior, and manipulated opportunities to avoid detection. The cabin itself, hidden deep in the desert, was rigged with evidence of long-term habitation, food supplies, makeshift restraints, and personal belongings arranged as though to assert control over the space. The evidence indicated that Emily had not been left to survive randomly, but had been trapped in a carefully constructed environment designed to enforce submission and dependence. Digital forensics further revealed communication patterns that had gone unnoticed. Messages sent and deleted, internet searches, and metadata from devices painted a timeline of planning and surveillance. The suspect had monitored Emily's life, possibly tracking routines from before her disappearance, and had maintained records during her captivity. Each new discovery added a layer to the grim narrative, confirming that this was not a spontaneous act of violence but a deliberate, prolonged campaign of abuse. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became that they were dealing with a meticulous and calculating individual who had manipulated every opportunity to remain undetected, leaving a child trapped in silence and fear for years. The investigation culminated in a tense operation to confront the man suspected of holding Emily Harper captive. Law enforcement officials coordinated a careful approach, knowing that any misstep could destroy crucial evidence or endanger lives. Surveillance confirmed that he remained at his remote cabin on the desert's edge, a structure that had become both a prison and a fortress. Officers moved under cover of darkness, their movements captured on bodycams and night vision equipment, documenting every step as they approached the property. The air was thick with anticipation and dread, each officer aware that the truth they were about to uncover would be horrifying. Upon entering the cabin, investigators found undeniable evidence of Emily's years of captivity. The interior was stark and clinical in its organization, with traces of her presence preserved in the form of drawings, journals, and scattered clothing. Makeshift restraints, carefully concealed, revealed the methods used to control and isolate her. Digital devices contained extensive records, including photographs and logs that documented her daily existence. Every detail confirmed the narrative that had been pieced together from the desert site. Emily had lived in a controlled environment, subjected to sustained abuse and manipulation. The realization struck even the most experienced officers with the weight of what had been endured. The suspect, confronted by law enforcement, was unable to escape the mounting evidence. During questioning, he revealed fragments of the grim story, admitting to keeping Emily hidden for years before her death. His explanations were chillingly calm, devoid of remorse, and underscored the calculated nature of his actions. The cabin, the desert site, and the digital trail collectively painted a portrait of meticulous planning. He had chosen the remote desert not by chance, but because it allowed him to maintain total control, far from the eyes of law enforcement and the public. Each revelation deepened the horror, highlighting the lengths to which he had gone to remain undetected. Authorities then worked to reconstruct Emily's final years, guided by evidence from both the cabin and the desert. Forensic analysis indicated that her last days were marked by the same isolation and control that had defined her captivity. Items found in the cabin, alongside digital logs, revealed attempts at limited resistance, small acts of defiance that had been systematically suppressed. The desert, where her body was ultimately discovered, symbolized both the isolation imposed on her and the grim inevitability of the concealment. It became clear that her death, though tragic, was the final result of years of calculated abuse rather than a single impulsive act. The conclusion of the investigation brought a mix of relief and horror. The man responsible was arrested and charged with multiple counts of abduction, abuse, and murder. The details of the case, once revealed, shocked the public, exposing the stark reality of hidden suffering and the ability of predators to exploit silence and isolation. Emily Harper's story became a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and awareness, a narrative of tragedy that demanded recognition and justice. Her recovery, though posthumous, allowed law enforcement to bring closure to a case that had haunted a community for nearly a decade, ensuring that the hidden crimes she endured were finally acknowledged and confronted.